Welcome to Original Being, where we explore the timeless wisdom of ancient practices and old ways of living. From holistic health and wellness to survival techniques, homesteading, and primitive skills. I'm Jillian Erice, a functional and holistic-minded physician associate and a homesteading mother of 3. I am on a quest to reconnect with the knowledge our ancestors lived by, practical skills, natural healing, and self-sufficiency in a modern world. Each episode, I'll be sharing insights, experiences, and conversations with experts and everyday people who embody this mindset. Together, we'll challenge modern conveniences, embrace hands-on learning, and rediscover the practices that have stood the test of time. Disclaimer, the information shared on this podcast is for educational and entertainment purposes only. My opinions and those of my guests are solely our own and are not affiliated with any institutions, employers, or certifications. This podcast does not provide medical advice, and any health-related decisions should be made in consultation with your personal healthcare provider. By listening, you acknowledge that you take full responsibility for your own choices and actions. Today on Original Being, I'm joined by Sarah White, a holistic health coach, homesteading and homeschooling mother of 2. She founded Holistic Roots Coaching to provide personalized wellness plans that go beyond generic programs, helping clients achieve balance and lasting health. With over a decade of experience, Sarah's background includes training at the Institute for Integrative Nutrition, a master's in social work from Simmons University, and certifications in yoga and meditation. Thanks for being here today, Sarah.
Thanks for having me.
So I'd love to start with your story, how you got into holistic health coaching and your whole overall lifestyle. How did you get to where you are today?
Yeah, so I think it's interesting when I look back to when I was little, I can really see how all the pieces came together to where I am now, but I definitely didn't know then, where I was going to go. So when I was younger, I always actually thought I was going to go into the world of fashion. I went to college and I studied business and I had all of this extra, work stuff in the fashion industry. I was always working in retail. I participated in the buying program at the TJX company. And all of a sudden in my early 20s, it sort of hit me. And I was like, what am I actually doing? Do I really want to do this? How am I contributing to the world? I felt like I was sort of just climbing the corporate ladder and just feeding into this industry that felt really dark and dismal. And I didn't feel like myself. And so at that moment, I sort of had that light bulb where I was like, oh, I think I want to do something different. And so I completely 180'd and I decided I wanted to go into social work. And the reason I decided on that was because I felt like I always enjoyed being able to help people. And I felt like I had a natural gift to be able to teach and to support people. And so I wanted to lean into that a little bit more. And so it kind of came as a shock to those who knew me that I was going to pivot in this direction because I had been going so steadfastly for so long into, maybe owning my own store or being a buyer for a big fashion corporation.
Yeah.
And so through changing my education and deciding to get my master's degree in social work, it sort of began to unfold. Now, interestingly enough, at this time in my life, I had a manifestation of some really significant mental health challenges. And I didn't realize then, but now looking back, I can see that there was a lot of things going on from when I was very little. But again, I just wasn't aware of it. Hindsight's sort of 20/20. But it really came to a head at this point in my life when I started experiencing chronic panic attacks. And I was experiencing upwards of 2 to 3 full-blown panic attacks a day. And not just the I'm feeling a little anxious, but the I feel like I'm dying. The first time it happened, I actually called 911 because I thought I was literally dying. And it's really scary and it was a really hard place to be. And in those moments, I was desperate for anything to just feel like I could have my life back. I had to put pause on my career. I had to put pause on my social life. As a young adult, I actually moved back in with my parents. It was really like the rug got pulled out from underneath me. And at the time, it really stunk. It was really hard. And now looking back, it was one of the best things that could have ever happened to me because I wouldn't be where I am now had I not gone through that. And, I think so many of us in this field of work, we come to it from our own journey.
Yeah.
And that helps us to have, empathy for the people that we're working with. So I tried the traditional modalities of healing. I went to a regular therapist. I went to a psychiatrist. I tried some medication. I tried, the typical evidence-based practices like CBT and DBT and all these things, and nothing really did the trick. And so it was actually my sister who said, maybe you should try yoga. And I said, okay, I'll cut my left arm off at this point. I'll do anything to not feel this way.
Yeah.
And so I found myself in a yoga class, and the first class, I didn't really like it, but there was something about it that made me want to go back. And so I did. And then the second, third, fourth time, I started to just continually feel better. And I wasn't sure why that was happening, but from that point forward, I stopped having panic attacks. And so my anxiety was still very present, but the severity of it was much less. And so I kind of continued on this path with investigating what is it about this yoga practice that's changing how I feel inside. And by immersing myself in the yoga community, I started to pay attention to how this group of people were living differently than the world that I was exposed to, which was this like high-paced, work, try to, keep getting a higher level position, do whatever it takes to get to the top type of reality, when I was, surrounding myself with these people that were taking a much slower pace to life, that were in tune with their body, that were paying attention to not only what it was that they were putting like into their mouth, but also like what they were ingesting through their eyes and through their ears. And really, again, didn't know them, but what I understand now is I was truly building a mind-body connection for myself. And so I started to change my life, not necessarily to mirror identically what everyone was doing, but I took the bits and pieces that felt authentic for me and was able to start to really connect to what was the most authentic version of myself, and no longer wear this hat of who I thought I was told I needed to be or who I thought society wanted me to be. And I really leaned into myself for the first time in my life. And so through that whole process, that just kept driving me to want to help people in this way, to go on and get my master's degree in social work, to go on and get trained to be a yoga teacher, to go on and do training in the world of meditation, and then to further study food and nutrition to really provide people a comprehensive approach to wellness. The other interesting part of my journey is while I went to school for social work, I ended up going into the traditional social work field for a period of time and worked primarily with addiction and co-occurring mental health. So dual diagnosis is what that's called. And worked in the dual diagnosis world for a little while. And I also found that sense of like emptiness, not really being able to totally be myself. I felt like I could help people this much, but then because of the constraints of like the world of insurance and the world of just all the things that bind us traditional social workers, I couldn't integrate this other approach that I knew from my own lived experience and from my training that would really, really work. And so I ended up leaving the traditional field, and I went out on my own and developed Holistic Roots Coaching, which is my holistic health coaching business, where I truly get to help people with a full mind, body, soul approach to their wellness. And I find it just to be so much more effective. And then in the middle of all of that, I started a family.
It's no big deal.
Yeah, just, pop a few kids out. So I went to graduate school, and it was actually my last year of graduate school that I found out I was pregnant. It was unexpected, and it was really a make or break type of deal. And it really brought everything together. It was definitely, divine and amazing, albeit a bumpy process. Boyfriend at the time, now husband, we weren't living together. We were actually living in separate states. He was in New Hampshire and I was in Boston, albeit close together, but still we were an hour away from each other. So there was a lot that went on in my last year of graduate school of just putting the pieces together and starting a family. So in 365 days, I finished my master's degree. I had a baby. we moved once, and then again in that same year ended up moving again and buying a house. Did I say we got married? We like legally got married and I started a new job.
Wow.
So I don't recommend that.
Yeah, that was a lot. A lot in a short time.
It was a lot. It was a lot in a short time. But we made it work, and, I'm so grateful. And now I have a daughter as well. So my son is 8 and my daughter is 5 now. And it's been an amazing journey. And it's just furthered me in my own path and own growth. And so in the process of leaving the traditional social work field, starting my own business, and then raising kids, it just inevitably evolved into homeschooling and wanting to have more time with my kids. And because I control my own schedule, having the capacity to do that, and then developing a homestead as well. And so it sort of all plays on each other. And it's a beautiful life, and I'm really grateful for it. But it's an interesting journey that got me here. And thinking back, I sort of chuckle. I'm like, man, I never thought, if I look back at, 15, 16-year-old Sarah, I never thought that she would be doing what she is now, but I'm so grateful for it.
Yeah, it's so interesting that you wanted to go into the fashion industry, which seems very opposite of where you are now. But I think everybody grows a lot from their initial early 20s goals and dreams, and we learn and evolve. And a lot of people, I find, by the time they're 30 have gone a little bit more in this direction too. But we find ourselves a little more in those years, and then we find our true self in that process. I want to go back to when you were talking about the panic attacks and then yoga and how much that helped you. Had you also made any dietary changes at that point, or were you already eating very healthy? Or do you think that there was anything else besides the yoga that helped with that and helped with the anxiety in a more natural way?
So at that time, I definitely wasn't eating very healthy. I think, in terms of like, we'll just use the ABCD sort of scale, like maybe a C+. Like I had some awareness maybe, but I definitely was not eating like a whole foods based diet. I was a vegetarian, which I thought was great at that point in my life. And that, maybe another conversation we can have of the journey of 20 years of not eating meat to becoming a carnivore now. But to answer your question, yeah, I definitely wasn't eating as well as I could have. And it was probably maybe 2 or 3 years into my recovery, we'll call it, from where things were at the worst, where I started to really change my diet even more. And the way that I went from where I was in terms of food, I actually became vegan for a period of time, which I think really helped reduce a lot of internal inflammation that I had. I ended up staying vegan and playing between vegan and vegetarianism for much, much longer, which I would not recommend. I think that it is a short-term solution for certain things, but in my background and knowledge, I don't think is an ideal long-term diet for most people. There might be unique situations where maybe I might recommend that. But so that I think did play a role. But the yoga part, I think, was really the catalyst because I didn't have any mind-body connection. Really, like the upstairs was just running, doing its thing. And I didn't have this awareness that there was this whole being underneath, subcortical, so to speak, that played a role in who I was. And I really had disconnected from her for so long. And I think that just comes from layers of just the way society is, the lack of education for our parents' generation in teaching kids at a young age how to connect to their body. I was bullied a lot in middle school. Really, really, really significantly, especially in 6th grade. And I think that those wounds were just raw. And I didn't ever heal at that point when I was really sick from a lot of those big moments in my youth that were really painful. And I developed a lot of hatred for myself and for my body because of the messages I was receiving from these bullies. Man, middle school's a rough time.
Yeah, it sure is, especially for girls, I think.
And I was at an all-girls school.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
And it was brutal. I mean, I remember calling my mom from the payphone. Oh my gosh. Yes, the payphone. Crying, saying, please come pick me up. I'm just, I'm so miserable. So yeah, I just didn't have this connection. And I think that I had shifted my identity to really try to appease. I had that people pleaser mentality inside of me that learned behavior or adaptation, we can call it, really that I developed for survival. I learned from being bullied that if I change who I am, then I'm not going to get hurt. And so that then gets ingrained in my mind and way of being that if I can just take care of everyone else around me and make sure that they're happy with who I am, then I'll be safe, which in actuality is very not healthy and isn't going to take me very far. And so it was a lot of undoing that narrative and really loving on that little version of myself to be able to move forward. And the practice of yoga laid the foundation for me to be able to do that. And I didn't really, again, understand that that's exactly what was happening in that time. But every time I got to my mat, right, my phone was off and I was left with just myself. And then, of course, listening to the teacher, but there wasn't a lot of background noise. There wasn't a lot of distraction. And I was really faced with just me. And then through the connection of learning how to breathe in a really conscious and meticulous way, just solidified and deepened that internal awareness and connection for myself, where I was left with oh my gosh, here I am. This is who I am. This is who I want to be. And then all this carried over into wanting to change my career path and leaning more into trying to share this gift. I jokingly have said to many people, with yoga, I feel like I unlocked this secret treasure when it happened. I was oh my God, the whole world has to know about this secret, because it was that big of a change for me and had such a significant impact. And then to speak to your food piece, like I said, it was a couple of years before I really started making more conscious change. And then that just furthered my recovery. Because again, the yoga took me from chronic panic attacks multiple times a day to just a baseline of anxiety throughout the day, not these huge manifestations of big, intense feeling. And then as years went by, the anxiety became smaller and smaller and smaller to the point where it's just not in the forefront of my everyday life anymore. It's still part of me, but it doesn't drive the bus.
Well, I love that the yoga was such a gateway for this for you. And it makes me think about, especially as women, and you're talking about society's expectations, being bullied in middle school, and then coming to this point where oftentimes there's a disordered eating component in maybe the teenage years or early 20s. We're limiting or eating certain things, food's kind of the enemy, and you are almost punishing yourself, and you're not living authentically. And then when you get to yoga and you are all of a sudden in touch with your body and then feel I want to nourish this body and take care of this body, not punish this body for not looking the way I thought it was supposed to look or I was told it was supposed to look. And then that mindset shift changes how you see food and how you approach eating in your life. And that I want to take care of this person. That helps you with the self-love cycle. That must make a huge difference. And do you see that in your clients as well?
Yeah, food as the enemy is a big thing. And I work predominantly with women. And I would say most, if not all of the women have a piece of that story that they carry. And it's really sad, because the most interesting thing that I found is, so I definitely went through periods of restricted eating. I was a ballet dancer in high school and all of those pieces. But when I was restricting my food and counting calories religiously and figuring out and calculating how many calories I was burning through the exercise that I was doing, I was X weight, okay? And then I shifted into this relationship of loving myself and wanting to nourish myself and intuitive eating, which I think would be important to talk about. But I started realizing that I was eating more calories than I was when I was restricting, and my weight stayed within a 5-pound range. And I find that to be just so interesting that absolutely. It wasn't all of a sudden I just gained all this extra weight, but I am eating way more than I ever did and still active, but not active to the point where I don't feel good and I'm still making sure I'm running those 5 miles. There are chunks of time that I take off and listening to my body and adjusting my workout regimen depending on where I'm at in my cycle and all of these things that I wasn't doing then. And yet still, it's not all of a sudden all this secret weight came piling back on. And so a lot of times I'll say to my clients, and sometimes they're surprised, I'm I eat at least 2,000 calories a day. And they're like, what?
Yeah.
I'm yeah.
You're like, but my fitness pal told me I was supposed to eat 1,200. What?
Right. Yeah. That's a surefire way to just send your hormones amok.
Yeah.
And that's like a minimum. Sometimes it's more than that, depending on what's going on. And again, where I'm at in my cycle, and just having the awareness and the connection to myself to be able to nourish myself is such a gift, because when we send the message to our body, like, I hate you, that gets internalized, and that actually changes the way that our cells operate. It actually sends a message to our body that changes the way our structure operates. So it's not even like it's just this negative message. It's creating this cascade effect. And there's been so much, dabbling in data and research around the world of autoimmune disease in women. And I find it really interesting. This is some of the work from Gabor Mate, where he wrote a book called When the Body Says No. And it was really about the culmination of this information he gleaned as a family physician with women who had adverse childhood events in their 30s developing autoimmune diseases, specifically MS. And so it's like, therein lies this truth of, when we have all this emotional turmoil, when we develop these adaptations, when our narrative changes, where we're hating on ourselves, the body speaks louder and louder and louder until we create a pathway for healing. And sometimes that is in the form of disease.
Yeah, absolutely. Yep. And the childhood trauma, I know that there's studies showing that we might have genes that are not turned on, and then you have childhood trauma and it turns those genes on for some of these disease states that we could have kept off. We could have kept it from happening, and no one's to blame for their own childhood trauma. It's just so fascinating that everything is so multifactorial. But I do wonder what is happening when you're directing self-hate. It's like we think about all the trauma and things coming from the outside and not from the inside out, and how that's influencing ourselves. And then our brains are so powerful, and our body is constantly responding to what the brain is telling the body to do. So if you're telling your body, I hate you, you're bad, you're not right, I want you to change, you're like we said, eating in a way that's not to nourish but to restrict, then the whole body feels that. Every cell feels that, like you're saying. It's really fascinating.
Yeah. So the work of Bessel van der Kolk, I don't know if you're familiar with him. So he wrote a book called The Body Keeps the Score.
Oh, I have it. I haven't read it yet. I'm like waiting to read it. It's on my bookshelf.
This is your sign. This is the time to read it. Yeah. So he was really cutting edge in the research of showing how, trauma is stored in the nervous system, and on the cellular level, it impacts the body. And, you touch on the topic of epigenetics, which I think is so important in this world of health, is we tell ourselves this story, oh, this is just in my genes. Oh, cancer runs in my bloodline, or mental health or addiction runs in my family. And while that is true, we now know, though, that through epigenetics, that our lifestyle has the capacity to turn off and on those genes that we may hold. Mm-hmm. And so we don't have to sit back and just say, well, everyone in my family is obese, so that's just part of my reality. I mean, if you want to accept that as your truth, that's okay. But it doesn't have to be, because through what we do in our lifestyle, not just food, but everything, we have the possibility of turning off and on those genes. And the other thing I wanted to mention, as you were talking about the, hating on our body and restricting food, there's an energetic component to how we approach our food, and then what we're thinking while we're eating it and ingesting it, and how that changes how our body receives it. So let's say hypothetically there's a situation where, due to like financial constraints, somebody doesn't have access to the most nutritive food that exists. And so they're doing the best they can, and they sit down at every meal and they say a little something over their food, whether you want to call it a blessing or an intention or a prayer, whatever your spiritual practice is. But they look at their food and just say, thank you, food. Please nourish my body in every way possible. Take in the good and let my body excrete the bad. When they have that moment and are eating intuitively, I believe wholeheartedly that person's experience will be different than the person that's just shoveling in that food that maybe isn't as, nutrient dense as it needs to be. And so that's a big piece of the puzzle too, is how often are we in relationship with our food and having that moment of pause to just be grateful for what's in front of us and asking it to just nourish our own body. You know, I'm guilty. I don't do that regularly, and I know this. So
yeah, sometimes there's not time, especially as a busy mom. Not always time to bless the food. Sometimes you're just starving.
yeah,
but it's a great point. And there's also things that show that just being mindful, you know, taking that pause. So even if someone isn't blessing the food, you're taking that moment to pause and be like, I'm about to eat. Because sometimes we're not even doing that. Like you said, we're doing something else while we're eating. We're eating because we think it's lunchtime and we have to eat, and whether we're hungry or not, and we're doing a bunch of other things. So yeah, to take the moment to be like, this meat came from this animal and this vegetable came from this place, and this is what I'm about to eat. And thank you for both of you giving your lives for me to be nourished and to have this, and to take that like moment to do that. Probably your whole body processes that too. And I know the brain does, because we know in medicine and in studies that helps the body understand it's going to eat, and you're going to be more mindful about what you eat. And you might not even need to eat that whole plate, because now you actually process that you were eating, and you can pause and feel when you're full and not overeat too. All of that is part of that connection. And we've gotten into such a fast food, not even just fast food as we think of fast food, but fast food where we're buying prepackaged stuff at the grocery store without even thinking about where it came from or what animal had to make that meat, because it just looks like meat. We're not looking at the face of that animal anymore. And that's part of what I like about homesteading too. Bring it all back around is just that, yeah, you put so much work in for these animals. So you love the animal and you care for the animal and you see them as a being. And then when you eat that meat, you're not going to waste it. You're not going to just be like, oh, well, kids didn't finish this, let's throw it in the trash. Like, you're like, no, that was so-and-so that we raised and loved, and this was a being that we cared for, and we're not going to waste this food at all, or any part of this animal. Or likewise your garden, you have the time and the effort. So it's part of that whole slowing down and being aware of everything that goes back into it.
We live in such a fast-paced world right now where everything is going so quick. And, you know, humans are evolving in a way, but technology is evolving exponentially more. And so we're asking our bodies and nervous systems to keep up in a reality that we literally are not even designed to do. So just at baseline, like, leave the curveballs that life throws at all of us. Just being a human in today, it's too much.
Yeah.
So as much as we can pull back and slow down and have those deeper connections, it's so much more helpful. It leads us to such a more fulfilled and healthy lifestyle. As much as I love, you know, to go, that's sort of how I was raised. That was sort of my default mode in my mind. I've had to retrain myself, and it has changed everything for me. I mean, I still do a lot, right? I'm a homeschool mom. I own my own business, and I have a homestead. That's crazy. That's a little crazy. So yeah, I'm still
You're my kind of person.
I'm a bit of the Energizer bunny. I thrive on that. But yet those things, maybe not owning my own business, but the homeschooling and homesteading require me to be home. And they require me to slow down enough to be able to do things like be in relationship with the animals that we're raising, to put on our plate, or to start a garden, or to be making sourdough bread. Like, all of these things are a slower pace, and it builds that reality where we have connection and depth, and we're not just like go and disconnected from everything. And it's such a gift. And while I never say, you know, everybody has to live that exact lifestyle, you know, different strokes for different folks. But I think that there's flavors of that we can invite into our lives that really help us. I give a talk a lot in my local community called the Foundations of Wellness at different sort of gyms and Pure Barre. And I taught at MIT this past summer at the Sloan Business School. And one of the foundational sort of little nuggets that I like to leave with people is the way that we get to a place where we can be in tune with ourselves and we can slow down is this. It's sit down and shut up. And that's it, right?
Just pause.
Just stop. Just stop.
Yeah.
Put down the phone, turn off the TV, just sit down and take 3 breaths and create that moment of pause for yourself, because therein lies so much information, right? We have it all inside of us. The answers that we seek live inside of us. but yet there's so much distraction, and it doesn't ever give us an opportunity to really stand in our power. And, I think that's by design. I'll put the tinfoil hat on for a moment. I think it is by design that the powers that be want us distracted, because we are such powerful beings, especially us women. Like, we are powerful, powerful beings. But if we're always disconnected from ourselves, we can't ever step into that power.
Yeah.
But when we do connect to ourselves, holy smokes, you better watch out. Because we then realize what it is that our body needs and what it's asking for, and we can listen to that and create a life that leans into that. And therein lies, I think, so much emotional freedom and happiness, because we're no longer buying into this narrative of, well, if I just buy this thing, if I just get the bigger house, if I just get the better job, then I'll be happy.
Yeah.
It's like, if I can just, how about just live and enjoy just living, being in the moment, being in connection with reality rather than this constant disconnection. It creates a lot more balance.
We all know social media has its issues, but our phones have kept us more distracted and more sucked into a dopamine high of viewing and flipping, and it's just so quick and it's instant gratification. And that's where we're losing a lot of our joy in life too. Because like you said, I mean, imagine if you do get that fast meal that you didn't even acknowledge you ate versus something that you took the time to make and like put love and effort and energy into. Like, how much more are you going to enjoy that than this other quick thing? And that goes for so much more than just food. And like you're saying, I mean, I'm very similar to you, and I talk very fast, as we can tell. I'm a very fast-paced person. I think very fast. I got a million thoughts in my mind at all times. And when I do have those moments, and they're not all the time, but when I do, and I finally am slowing down, or like you said, I'm really present with the kids, or I'm like, you know what? My body is asking me to like take a break today. I go to the gym most days and do really heavy lifting. And then again, certain times of my cycle, I'm like not feeling it. And I'm like, instead of pushing myself, which is what I would normally do, be like, well, you should do this. If you don't want to, you got to do it even more. That's like what I'm always telling myself. No, let's pause and feel my body and say, I need to take it a little easy today. I'm going to let myself relax a little bit, let myself pause, maybe let that laundry go undone, which is really hard to do, just those things. But then pausing, being present, finally feel that like moment of peace. And some people don't ever get that. Some people either A, never let themselves get it, or B, maybe just their job and their life doesn't ever allow for it. They're not homesteading, they're in a city, or they're in a really busy environment where they're super out of touch with nature. And actually, on that topic, I'm curious, do you have clients that maybe don't live as local to you and are in a situation like that? What kind of advice do you have for them?
Yeah. So I worked with somebody from LA, and he, lived the typical LA lifestyle. He's a musician. And, I think there's always ways that we can do things. And sometimes when we think about the things we should do in terms of health, of like get into nature, eat better food, right? Slow down, we think of the like ideal scenario. Like, I'm going to get massages once a week, and I'm going to cook every meal from scratch, and I'm going to just bask in the forest 3 hours every day. And while that would be amazing, it's just not real life. And so really just retraining our mind to emphasize the small things we can do and remember that they're so impactful. So like in the world of meditation, right? It's really 2 to 3 minutes 3 to 4 times a week is all you need to actually change the neural circuitry in your brain.
That's amazing.
That's it. That's like, who doesn't have 2 to 3 minutes a day?
Yeah.
None of us. You're lying. You're saying you don't. I'm sorry. But so I had shared with him about when you're on a vacation somewhere and you happen to be in more forested areas, spend more time there. If you can be mindful about just getting outside and taking a walk, even though you're in a city, just get outside the 4 walls of your space, your home, and just get into the fresh air, feel the sunlight on your skin. Like that has a powerful impact. And then notice and recognize the especially fast-paced world in LA. And how do you honor yourself and take small moments to slow down? Like, what are the things that you are able to say no to? Yes, like you're up late at night. It's that, musician style life where it's a lot of sleeping during the day and up at night, and circadian rhythm is off and all of these things. But maybe it's just on those days when you're not touring, or the days that you do have off, that you're just beefing up those extra pieces of nourishment for yourself. And then when you're not, you're not. And that in and of itself is enough to feel a change. Again, I think we just search for the ideal, or we see the ideal on social media or in the media, and we think that I'm not going to feel well unless I get to that. And that's really just not true. You know,
right?
Because,
like perfection. Yeah, like it has to be perfect or it's not even going to do anything. So I'm not going to bother.
right. And that's all what we call all or nothing thinking in the world of cognitive behavioral therapy. And that is a big thing that people fall into. And part of the work I do with people is understanding the stories they tell themselves. And I always will ask them, whose story is that? Who taught you that if you can't do it all, you might as well do nothing?
Yeah.
Was it somewhere along the line that message was ingrained? Maybe it was a movie. Maybe it was a coach. Maybe it was a parent. Maybe it was a grandparent, a teacher. Who knows? But can we go back and look at these little versions of you and understand where these stories come from and realize that some of them aren't yours? And then because you're the author of your own story, you get to decide, do you want to take that forward? Or do you want to rewrite your narrative? Like, what a gift. How empowering to realize that. And yet, again, it's really the basics. You know, when I work with people, sometimes we get going and they'll say, you know, this is such simple things, hard to implement, but such simple things. And it makes such a difference. And I'm like, yeah, it's really not rocket science, right? The secret to health, to happiness, to emotional freedom, it's the basics. Sleep, go outside, shut off your phone, eat real food, and build a relationship to this vessel that you live in, like all facets of it. Know the ins and outs of it. You know, I ask my clients sometimes, like, when was the last time you like intentionally placed your hands on your body? I have yet to work with someone that was like, yeah, just yesterday. Took a moment, I connected with we're not taught that.
No.
We're not taught that, especially as women. I'm like, place your hands on your belly. What's your first thought? I hate it. It's flabby. It's this. It's a. What if you start to feel it and connect to what it does for you? Like what you're placing your hands on assimilates your food, right? You've got your liver in there that's helping detox your body. You've got your diaphragm in there that's helping you to breathe, your lungs that's supporting yourself with oxygen, your heart that's keeping you alive. How does it feel when we start to relate to ourselves in that way? Right? It's just changing that mindset, changing those stories, and it creates this capacity for us to become very empowered.
I think there's almost a level of guilt with self-love or something. Like we're almost taught, well, when you love yourself, you're too confident or something. There's something that I'm feeling. There's an ego there. We can't be like, you're awesome, you're great, you're beautiful. No, I'm not. I'm supposed to not feel that way. I'm supposed to be modest and that's too egotistical. And there's this level of guilt. I want to send this major self-love to myself. And then it feels like, oh, but that's a little too much.
Yeah.
Is that something that you find too?
Yeah, no, definitely. I mean, I think for so many years, and it still trickles in time and time again where I'm like, oh, I'm being over the top, or I'm being too loud, or I'm being too outspoken, or, you know, I shouldn't have permission to feel this amazing.
Yeah, permission.
Yeah, that's still sometimes a reality of mine. Not as much as it used to be, but I think it also is a big thing for women where it's like, be loud, but don't be too loud. Be confident, but don't be too confident. And I think that's just like a societal message that we get that is internalized, you know, and I think there's no surprise that women are way more likely to develop autoimmune diseases than men, right? The body starts attacking itself when we send the message to it that we hate it.
Yeah.
And that's such an internalized experience for so many women, you know, and I think that this is where we have to really get real with ourselves of understanding, like, where does that come from? At what point in my life was I internalizing that message? So there's this unique thing that happens from 0 to 7-ish, where how we relate to ourselves and how we relate to the world around us, that blueprint is embedded in our mind and then it's set. So as a parent, like, holy crap,
Yeah.
that's super scary. My son's 8. I'm like, good luck, buddy.
You're like, you're done. Whatever happened, happened.
Thank God for, therapeutic intervention and other things we know that can
Yeah.
change, the neural connections in the mind and understanding neuroplasticity. So it's set in stone, but there are ways that it can be changed. But it's really established. And during that time in the subconscious for these young humans, there's this grappling between authenticity and autonomy. And anytime a kid is faced, again, young child, with, do I hold my autonomy with my caregiver, which is the person that makes sure I have a roof over my head, feeds me, etc., or do I be the most authentic version of myself and fear losing that connection? The child will always, always choose the connection. Again, this is subconscious.
Yep.
Okay, so then when they choose that connection and they deny the authenticity, right, they're slowly building that narrative of, I shouldn't be who I am. I shouldn't be too loud. I shouldn't be too confident. I shouldn't feel so sexy and beautiful and pretty. And so then as time evolves, and then you've got just life like social media and bullying and advertising and all of this that cakes onto it, it's no wonder that we come to feel the way we feel. Now, the good news, right, that's a little doom and gloom, but the good news in all of this is there's this beautiful modality of getting to know these parts of ourselves and changing how we relate to them. So what I just described, authenticity and autonomy, that's the work of Gabor Mate, and IFS, internal family systems therapy, is a beautiful approach to really getting to know these parts of ourselves that make us us, and changing how we relate to them. So we can't change what happened to us. Whatever happened, happened. That's the past. At least I don't know how to do that yet. But we can change how we relate to it. And so it's in that changing how we relate to those moments when we internalized those feelings of don't be too loud or don't come in guns a-blazing feeling like you're the sexiest person in the room. And we have these conversations through meditation practice, if you will, with these parts of ourselves in the most non-psychotic way.
Yeah.
To create healing. If I describe what I do with people without the context, it sounds absolutely ludicrous. I'm like, we're going to talk to younger versions of yourself.
I actually love it. I think it's a fascinating, amazing approach, and I really enjoyed it. But then I would tell some people, and they were totally opposed to it. One of my sons and my father, actually, I was like, oh, I was telling them about it. I tried to get my dad to read the book, and he is an avid, amazing reader. He'll read a huge book in 1 day, 1 second. He barely looked at the first few pages about what it was about and was like, never. And I'm like, well, that says a lot, because why are you so afraid to look inside that way? But both him and my mother both had very traumatic childhoods. And so I found that really interesting that he was so opposed to it.
Well, this is part of the thing about this work. I always jokingly say to clients, I have a horrible business model because the work I do, my sort of niche and specialty is about going deep. My business is called Holistic Roots Coaching because I help people get to the root. Where does it come from?
Yeah.
We all know the basics of what we need to do. Maybe we don't know all the nuances with food about what to eat. There's some, generally speaking, if I'm what might help you feel better, people know. And yet they struggle to take the steps to be consistent with it. And yes, there's systemic issues that can prevent that. But the emotional part is a big piece of that puzzle as well. And what I mean by that is they don't understand where it comes from. Why are they operating the way they are? So I really come in and help people uncover that. And so, we have to walk through some pretty dark spaces, and we have to kind of shed some light on the things that we've buried down and maybe hope that we would never look at again. And so to say to someone hey, come pay me some money and I'm going to walk you through the depths of your soul and all the skeletons in your closet. And they're like, I'm all set. I can't be mad because I'm that doesn't sound that fun, does it? But what
sign me up, but other people, not so much.
What I can say is on the other side of that is so much freedom. And I know because 1, I live it myself. And 2, time and time again, as I walk people through this process, I watch it happen for other people. It's like the weight of the world, or feeling like there's this sort of shackling, this that we're bound, and then breaking free of that. and what that feels like. Because for me, that's what my anxiety was, right? It was just this shackle of these stories that weren't my own, that I was carrying in this disconnection. And once I was able to rewrite those and change that, and also, learn skills and tools like breathing strategies and stuff like that, it really opened me up for so much more possibility. And then we step into what I call the flow state, where like life just unfolds in a way, like it's still hard, don't get me wrong, shit hits the fan time and time again. But like generally speaking, things kind of just go. And there's like a fluidity to it. And that's what I call the flow state. And when we're living our purpose and when we're connected to ourselves, we can get to that. And that makes life so much more manageable than the constant feeling like doors are just closing all around us. Life is a mirror, right? How we relate to ourselves and our capacity to be in touch with our emotion and our energy, the universe will mirror that. So the things that happen to us, I believe, are a reflection of our own stuff. And with the world of motherhood, I don't know if you've experienced this, but I feel like our kids are also little mirrors. Sometimes it sucks because I'm like, where did you learn that? Oh, that's me. Yeah. Okay.
Or your energy. I mean, I have a sign in my kitchen that actually was in my mom's kitchen my whole life. And it says, if mama ain't happy, ain't nobody happy. But you can look at that like, ooh, that's not nice. She's just making people miserable. But I think it's actually the opposite. We are projecting our energy onto the whole family dynamic. And so when you're positive and happy and you're seeing your children in a positive light and seeing the best in them, that's what you get back, and vice versa. And I see that all the time. If I'm stressed out and I'm angry and I'm just seeing like they're overstimulating me and they're not helping me or whatever, they're acting up. It's a whole negative thing. And then when I shift that mindset and I'm like, oh, they're just these sweet, innocent children still. And like, I need to calm down and I need to regulate my emotions and I need to, let them have their childhood and be present. Then it's so much better.
No, it is. And, it's interesting. When I first became a mom, I hated motherhood. I really was not happy I was like, whoa, nobody told me it was like this. And I got stuck in this narrative, like my freedom's gone. I can't do what I want anymore. This is really hard. I'm really tired. And it had a huge impact in the way that I mothered, in my ability to mother, and just my overall like satisfaction, And I look back now and I mean, not much I can do about it, but I see how it impacted, especially my son, because he was my first child for those first few years. I mean, it was rough. And then I got to this place where I was like, wait a minute, what am I doing here? Again, like I'm the author of my story. If I want to continue to play out this narrative about how hard this is and how awful this is, I'm missing out in the fun part because it just overtakes it. And through like really changing my lens and awareness, and I had to get over some of my stuff, and this is where kids can sometimes be a gift. I think we have two choices as in the world of parents. Kids invite us to deal with our stuff in a very, very deep way, or we can ignore it, and that's how generational trauma continues.
Yeah.
And so I had to, even though I was already years into doing self-work, I was face to face with some deep, dark stuff that I was like, oh yeah, I thought I wasn't going to have to go there, but I did. And when I did, it opened up this possibility for me to love being a mom. I mean, it's still hard. It's the hardest job that I've ever done, but I enjoy it now. And I don't constantly feel like I'm at some disadvantage or missing out, or that like, I've found the joy in it because I've been able to unlock those parts of myself that were telling me the story that made me really hate it.
Yeah.
And so I think that there's this balance of, we get this invitation to do this work as moms, and then we realize how much our energy impacts our kids, and we want to keep that positivity. And yet also what a gift it is to show our kids that we're human and that sometimes we don't feel good. And how we navigate that to try to like step out of that, what I call toxic positivity mentality, where I've met people before in the world of psychotherapy, actually at a job I had. I'll never forget this young woman where she was like, everything was so positive, like all the time, to the point where I was like, girlfriend, there's lots of feelings and they're all meant to be felt. And like, you're living in these three feelings. And I'm telling you, later on, it's going to bite you in the butt. But yeah, we are human too. And sometimes we have a bad day, and it's okay to be like, you know what? Mom's dysregulated.
Yeah.
And doesn't feel good. And so I know that's going to impact you. So let's, figure out how we can change today to support everyone's needs and really letting it be a collaborative experience. And that, I think, has also helped me to connect more with my kids and not always feel like I have to do it all.
Yeah. I don't think I really saw my mother as a human until I was an adult. Saw her humanity. Yeah, I think she is very tough, and she had a very traumatic childhood. And she did not show us a lot of vulnerability. And I think that would have been helpful, she was an amazing mother, but she was all mother and she was all in. And it was like, there wasn't a lot of, I'm feeling this way or I need this, because she didn't want to make us kids feel like she needed us, I guess, in some way. Like there was just no way to show that. But I have caught myself a little bit in that. And oftentimes, and I've been very vulnerable with my kids. And if I have those moments, I apologize. I apologize a lot to them.
Right.
I'm like, I'm really sorry I did not respond the way I should have there. Like I have to. And I hope that it does something, because I make mistakes. And I tell them too, I am a human too, and I'm doing the best I can. And sometimes I make mistakes, and I'm sorry for that, because I'm trying to be the best mom I can for you guys.
Right. And what a beautiful thing. And it's called the repair.
Yeah.
And a lot of times as parents, we think that if we make a mistake that we've ruined our kids. But as long as the repair is made, you're golden. We are human. I jokingly say to my kids a lot, I'm not a robot. I'm a human too. I have feelings. I feel things. I'm not a robot. And I also like to say, I'm also not your servant.
Yeah, because you do feel like that a lot. Yeah. And or as a mother, that you can't pursue your interests or be an individual anymore, because so much of your time and energy is now invested in these little people. And I have a lot of interests. It makes me happy to pursue my interests and hobbies and stuff. And I hope that they benefit from seeing that I do make time for myself in those ways, and that makes me a better mother, and they can see, oh, mom's pursuing this and she has these passions and these things. So maybe that gives them permission to pursue their passions and their dreams too.
Right. To create that balance. I mean, similarly to you, I don't think I ever saw my mom really break down as a child, and she did it all. And she did it all most of the time with a smile on her face. And I think she did that out of love and wanting to provide for us. She had a tough childhood herself and didn't want me and my siblings to be raised that way. But unfortunately, the message that is internalized for a young woman is like, do it all and do it with grace and don't ever stop.
Yeah.
Or
don't ever cry. Don't ever show vulnerability. Don't break down.
Right.
It's not
exactly.
allowed.
And so, it's interesting because our parents' generation, I think most of them had difficulty in their youth. And so out of the kindness of their heart, they're like, well, I don't want my kids to go through this. And so then it's like, and this is how the cycles just continue. And also from what I hear from clients and what I know from my friends and friends' parents that I know, a lot of our parents weren't so like emotionally connected, like to the point where they were like, I'm feeling all my feelings and I'm expressing them. I'm letting them move through my body. Like that wasn't a thing in their youth. And so then what happens is as parents, they're not then teaching kids that because they don't have that capacity. And then we get a generation like us where we have all these feelings and we don't know what the heck to do with them. And there's all these things we can grab at that give us this quick dopamine. And so no wonder we experience what we experience. And that's not to like, well, I'm not blaming all of the parents, right? People do the best they can with the information and resources they have in the moment. But it just creates this understanding of like, how do we end up the way that we are? And I think that that's one, it's like a recipe. It's almost like the perfect storm, like a recipe for disaster, right? We have all these feelings. We don't know how to feel them. And then yet we have all these things at our disposal to numb and distract. Well, yeah, of course I want to do that. You had mentioned dopamine, and I wanted to say kind of an interesting fact that I had learned about dopamine a while ago. And as we're talking about screens and drugs and things that we can reach out to that give us that, what feels like a quick fix. So as high as our dopamine rises, it has to equally go as low below the baseline and then return to baseline. So it's this yo-yo effect of like, we spike our dopamine to points where, depending on what we're using for that spike, that are so high that real life can never get us there.
Mm-hmm.
And then we're going equally as low. And then we've got to come back to baseline. No wonder people feel like garbage. That's a lot to deal with.
And nothing can compare, like or for a kid with a video game or the TV, bright, flashing lights, noises, constant stimulation. And then we're like, well, go play outside. And then they're like, well, this is boring. And if they didn't have that, it wouldn't be boring. It would be fascinating. They'd finally be out there noticing all these little things. But the stimulation is so great that now these small joys are no longer noticed.
Right. And then we miss out on life in that way. Then we're chasing something that we want to feel that doesn't exist. And so therein lies this cycle. In the world of addiction, when I worked as a social worker, it's really not about why are people getting addicted. It's really why are people hurting so bad that they're reaching out for something. And something I used to always ask people is, what did this substance do for you? Tell me why you loved it. How did it make you feel? That's like the first question, because it's like, oh, well, it felt like, a lot of people who use heroin would describe it as, it felt like a warm hug. Well, tell me why that hug felt so good. Because no one's ever hugged me in my whole life, right? Those are the stories that I would hear. And it's like, okay, well, that makes a lot of sense. Then we figure out the direction of like, how does this person begin to feel loved without this substance?
Or just relief. A lot of addicts will say that first time they felt peace and relief for the first time in their life. And you just think, what is the tension and the pain that they're holding? That was the only way to get relief from that was heroin. It's horrible. It's so sad.
There's so much at our disposal to try to escape. And coming back to the screens for kids, I was listening to a podcast and the person being interviewed said, imagine you have a child who's 1 year old. Would you stick a needle in their arm and shoot them up with heroin? And at first I was like, oh my God, like that's horrific. And then they went on to say, that's what you're doing when you put a screen in front of them. My initial reaction was, how dare someone say that? That's so extreme. Then I took a step back and realized my ego was getting stung. And I was like, you know what? On a level of what's happening in the brain, obviously, like, there's a difference, okay?
Right.
But what's happening in the brain in
physiologically,
terms of the reward system is the exact same. So what we've just normalized one and shamed the other. And so it is so important to understand these things. And I think a lot of people don't realize the severity of what's out there. And it goes with food, the chemicals that are in food. It goes with the phones that we have that we're all addicted to. I had this goal of not sleeping with my phone next to my bed for like 2 years. I'm like, I gotta like put it in the kitchen or somewhere else because of, one, just distractibility of having it next to my bed, and two, the world of like EMFs and all of that, which is a whole nother conversation. But it took me 2 years to finally do it. Why? Because I'm addicted to it just like everyone else. I like to think that my addiction's a little bit in control. I only average about 2 to 3 hours of screen time a day. But no, the reality is like I'm equally a victim to it just like everyone else. And so like if it wasn't that big of a deal, I know that it's not good for me to sleep with it next to me. Why am I not doing it? Right.
Also, just people being able to get a hold of you now, though. Like, I don't know about you. I know some people are trying to bring back house phones, but we don't have a house phone. So in my mind, I'm always like, well, what if something happens to my parents or, something really important and they need to get a hold of me? And now I don't want the phone near me, but if I don't have access to it, what am I going to do? And we've been so connected because now people can get a hold of us all the time, which that didn't used to be the case at all, which I think back already, we grew up in a generation where there wasn't cell phones, and I already can't really remember what it would be like to just not be able to get a hold of someone and someone's late and you don't know where they are. And you don't know when they're going to get there. And I'm like, that's crazy. That's terrifying. And with kids, as the kids get older, my oldest starts driving next year. I'm like, oh, like, what would I do if he didn't have a phone? I'd be so worried all the time. So there is a pro and a con. Obviously, that's great that we have emergency way to contact people, but we're so used to it now that we're now terrified to be separated from our phones because it's our connection to all the rest of the world.
Well, we're used to this world where everything's instantaneous.
Yes.
I can know where someone is right away. I can have my groceries delivered to my doorstep. I can order something on Amazon Prime and it's there in a day. I always say to my kids, you realize how lucky you are, right? You want this thing and it's on your doorstep tomorrow. Or you watch Netflix and there's no commercials, right? Everything is so...
Or you can binge watch, so you don't have to wait till next week to see the show.
Right. Exactly. You can watch 3 seasons in one day, right?
Yeah.
No, it's really it is a blessing and a curse, and it's something that we have to treat with the utmost respect. And phones and relationship to technology is a huge piece of the work that I do with people. I always talk to them about like, what is your screen time? So let's start there. And then I have people track, especially with social media. I have people do a lot of journaling, but one of the things I have them do is before you pick up your phone, do a self-check-in. How do you feel? And then when you're done with your phone, do a self-check-in and put it on paper and track it for 2 weeks. And then let's take a look. How many times did you feel better when you put your phone down? Out of the, 90 times that it happened in those 2 weeks, maybe twice, right? Usually people say they feel worse, and yet they still do it, right? It's the true definition of an addiction, right? It's impacting your life in a negative way, and yet you feel like you can't stop. And so it's a piece that we really have to consider. And this is why having a relationship to yourself is so key, because your body is feeding you information all the time. But when we're so distracted, we don't receive it. So if we are paying attention, we start to notice, oh yeah, I'm not feeling good after I get off social media.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, I'm not feeling good when I'm getting bombarded with text all day and feeling like I have to respond immediately. And this is where boundaries become a huge part of the discussion. And how do we protect our own peace, right? First is the self-awareness. We got to know what's going on in our body and how we're feeling, the messages our body is saying to us. And then we have to figure out, how do we create boundaries that help us to slow down enough and to protect our own peace so that we're not feeling like everything is just overpouring. And this is why I love the homeschool homestead life and vibe, because I feel like I have my home, like my own little oasis on my property. Now, I have 1 acre of land. Most people think I own like 15 acres when they hear about what I do and what I have. So you can do a lot with a little land. But what I love about it is it creates this dynamic where I have independence, I have autonomy, I have my own little world where I don't feel like I'm constantly being infiltrated by all the systems at play.
Yeah.
Because let's face it, a lot of the systems that exist in this country are not working well, and they're not helping people, right? We're the sickest nation in the world.
Yeah.
Okay. Or one of them. This is why. And so the more that we can be more self-sufficient in terms of like having this relationship to ourselves, being able to know how to be in relationship with our own food in whatever capacity that looks like, even an inside herbal garden against a window or a massive garden in your backyard, to have a relationship with food that you're raising. Or maybe you don't have a lot of land and you're hunting instead, or you're building a relationship with a local farmer and you're getting your food that way. You're taking on your own making of medicine and homeschooling children, right? We're taking back the power. That's how I look at it in the lifestyle that I live. Is I feel like, if everything implodes, I think I'm going to be okay. Power makes me feel strong and able to move forward when life gets hard.
Yeah. Well, I love that you said that, that you have 1 acre and that you're doing that, because we know homeschooling isn't going to be possible for everyone, financially or whatever their job situation is, or even homesteading. There's access to land is getting harder and harder. A lot of people can't even buy homes anymore. So there is a component to like, yes, we have a level of privilege even in what we are able to get, and that's amazing. But if you can meet yourself where you're at, and like, just like you're saying, like, what can you do, even as small as it is? What are you capable of? What do you want to do to make that difference? And taking your power back in that way is so amazing. You can still make big differences in your life with what you're able to do that makes sense for your personal life. I was also thinking about the mindfulness, that like everything you're saying, I just keep thinking mindfulness, because if you can pause for even a little bit when that craving comes up for look at my phone or whatever someone's dopamine high is, or their addiction, everybody's addicted to something essentially, to just like actually be aware of that thought, instead of it being the thought came and I was so mindless that I just grabbed it and I just did it, to be like, wait a minute, I'm craving looking at my phone right now. Why is that happening? Like, is it because I'm bored? Is it because I'm trying to distract myself from something I don't want to do? Whatever. There's a bunch of different reasons it could be, but to like actually pause and then decide, and do I really want to do that? Like you said, okay, I'm going to act on this. I'm going to act on this desire. And then how did that actually make me feel? did it really bring me joy, or was it just actually fulfilling those other things that I should have found another way or could have found another way to address?
Yeah. Well, what you're describing is a beautiful moment of pause. And that is the work of Eckhart Tolle, where we have a stimulus and often we react. And we live in this world where it's stimulus, reaction, stimulus, reaction, stimulus, reaction. And with the practice of mindfulness, what it does in terms of the neural circuitry in the mind is it builds this new neural pathway where we have this capacity to have a stimulus occur. And then there's this beautiful moment of pause. And on the other end of that pause is conscious choice. And when we lead a life where we're making conscious choice and we're being intentional with what we're doing, the outcome is so different. And again, it comes back to this, like, sit down and shut up, right? If we don't slow down, it is impossible to tackle these things. We have to have this capacity to slow down enough to be aware. And how do we develop this awareness? Well, the practice of meditation and mindfulness is so important. Now, there's a caveat to that, because that is not the first step for all people. If someone's showing up to the table with intense levels of trauma, asking them to sit down and meditate could actually be catastrophic. And this is why the world of somatics is so helpful in getting people into their body and helping them to build a relationship with their body through movement and breath work and things like that. So that way they can develop this internal safety. And then from there, they can sit with their thoughts. So if you're listening to this and you're a person who tries meditation, you feel complete overwhelm after 1 to 2 minutes, then it's probably likely that you may feel better by putting on some music and dancing for 5 minutes in the most freeing, silly way that you know how. There's no rules of how it has to be, or just standing, kind of just bouncing up and down and taking some deep breaths and opening up your mouth and letting out an audible exhale. That's going to help you get into your body and access your body in a safer way, and also build tone of your vagal nerve. And then from there, you can evolve into these more still, quiet practices of sitting and being with yourself. And so there's this misperception a lot of people have where they're like, I'm trying to meditate and I just can't do it and it's not working. And yes, at some point when we first sit down, we're overwhelmed with how fast the monkey mind goes. But if you're sitting and you're becoming so overwhelmed to the point where you feel like you're completely dysregulated, then adding some level of movement into your body, synchronized with some breath work, or something as easy as just tapping from your shoulder to your wrist, up and down one arm a few times, and then doing the other, and doing this throughout your whole body, taking 3 minutes, is a beautiful practice that could give you the same effect that sitting down and observing and watching your thoughts could as well.
What do you think about EFT?
I think it's awesome. I'm not trained in it. I know a lot of people that are. I was just speaking with someone who I'm actually going to be interviewed on her podcast. She's a clinician and she's part of I forget what it's called. It's something like energetic psychology, something in that family. It's very interesting. But she's on the board of this organization and EFT is a big part of it. And she was saying that the data is showing that EFT is like exponentially more impactful than any other clinical intervention that exists in terms of like CBT, DBT, and all these other things that people offer. So I think it's awesome. I think there's many ways to get to the top of the mountain. And it all starts with people building some relationship to themselves and being able to listen to what feels good and what doesn't, and being able to give that feedback, because we all can reach this place of internal peace. And I think EFT might really help somebody. Yoga might really help somebody. You know, there's a lot of different things that exist, but I'm a big fan. And if people have access to that, I think it's worth trying. People love EMDR. That's another great modality that people have had really good success with. You know, I think that we're blessed that there's a lot that exists and people have things to choose from. But regardless, the one piece I think that's consistent for everyone that is a necessity is people have got to be taught how to be in connection with themselves. And that's not always happening.
Yeah. I'm curious because I'm obviously coming from an allopathic background, and this is just not even remotely brought into medicine. And mostly because there isn't time, which is very unfortunate, but that's just how it works with insurance and with the system and the way patients are scheduled. Or like for me, I'm trying so hard to bring whatever I can as far as nutrition and some mindfulness stuff in, but I have such a limited amount of time, and I sort of just leading a horse to water. And if they want to drink, great. And if they don't, they don't. Or I'm telling them, go find somebody else, who can help you and do these things with you as well. But how amazing would it be if we were always collaborating, as the allopathic practitioner was collaborating with a holistic health coach, and there was that communication to bring mental health is so important for physical health, and to just make that connection and work together. It would be so wonderful. It's so lacking.
Well, there's functional doctors' offices that have health coaches on staff.
Yeah.
Big ones. Like there's some in New York City, there's some in Chicago. So it's becoming a thing where practices are hiring people like myself to be on staff, so that 15-minute session the doctor has with the patient can then be carried on with multiple sessions with the health coach after the fact to help really integrate what the doctor is suggesting. And I think that is a beautiful approach. I mean, there's a time and place for it all, right?
Yeah.
Allopathic medicine saved my life. I had Lyme carditis, Lyme's disease that affects the heart, and I was inpatient at MGH in Boston for 5 days getting antibiotics intravenously. I walked in with a heart rate at 26. So thank God that knowledge and medicine exists in that way.
Yeah, absolutely.
And also, it's way overused in many ways that's hurting other people. And we're missing a huge part of the conversation in a lot of allopathic medicine, like you touched upon, which is this whole mind-body piece and the role that our lifestyle plays in it. In one of the talks that I was giving at MIT, I was talking to the students about, when have you gone to a doctor and the first thing they asked you is, like, how are you doing? What is life like at home for you? Do you like your job? Do you like your relationship? Do you feel happy in any given moment of any day? Like, how often do you feel like you're enjoying what you're doing? What if there was 5 to 10 minutes of that before, like, let me just stick some things in your eyes, ears, nose, and throat and tell you everything looks fine and your labs are great and sorry you feel like crap, I don't know what to do.
Right. Or there's just one symptom, so let's just give you this medication to address this one symptom, and that's it.
Right. How about, like, what do you eat? Do you move your body?
Yeah.
Right? You have these symptoms that there's no way, there's too much science that exists now. You could never convince me that those things don't have an impact. They do. And even in the world of Western medicine, people understand that to be true. So why are we not talking about this? Right? I see so many people's symptoms improve just through changing what they're eating.
I see the attitude in medicine is often, if I talk to colleagues or I'm at conferences, there's just an assumption that the patients are just not going to do it. I think that's so wrong, because we can't assume what anyone's going to do or what their response is going to be. So that's why I always say, like I just said, I lead a horse to water, because I approach it and I open the topic and then I kind of just watch and see the patient's response to it. And there are people that no one ever gets really defensive or mad. Sometimes they're just like, yeah, I know my diet's really not great. Like you said, people know when they're not eating healthy. People know when things could be better, or they're living a high stress life, or they haven't really been mindful. Whether they're ready to make a change is another story, but sometimes they are. And if you never gave them that option, or they come to you as a medical provider, almost in like a position of power, like asking for help, they're the vulnerable one. And the medical providers are rarely showing their patients their own vulnerability, which I think would be good, actually, sometimes, to see the humanity in the provider as well. But they're coming to you in this vulnerable state. And if you tell them diet has nothing to do with it, or you just tell them, well, here's this pill, here's this medicine, okay, goodbye, then they lose all their personal power too, like you were saying as well. Now that patient thinks their health and their well-being is in the hands of that provider. And if what they give them didn't work, now they're even more upset and stressed out, because now they have to go back and say, you didn't help me. This didn't work. Now what? Okay, here's this medicine. Oh, here's this medicine. It just keeps going, instead of like, well, I'm going to give you this because this is all we have in our toolkit in modern medicine. But you could also try these changes if you're willing. This could be contributing. This could be contributing, everything we just talked about. And then it's up to them. And then they actually, often I found they feel very empowered. Wow, I can do that. I can make this change. Now there's something they can do. There is a flip side to that, which I see with some chronic illnesses, people who have been really stuck in the medical system without a lot of help for a really long time, or are really, really identified with their chronic health diagnosis. Some people get very attached to their diagnosis, and then they don't really want to take responsibility because now they do have power and they can change and they can separate from that. And that's kind of a whole other story. I find most patients are happy to actually have something that they can do too, and that they can make a difference in their life.
Yeah, well, it just plays into this dynamic of all the answers are outside ourselves, right? When you're sick, you go see this person and they tell you what to do. When you feel like you need help with this, then you go to this other person and they tell you what to do. And it's great to seek out knowledge and information and have professionals who can support. But again, like, we're taking out the autonomy of the patient, of giving them back the power, right? People, right? Sometimes we develop this victimhood mentality where we're like, who's just going to come save me? The doctor's just got to give me the answer. And that's just not how it goes, right? We really want to invite people to take back their own power and realize you have the capacity to change this, right? You can change your story. You're the only person who can. And so, yes, it's great to seek out information and get resources. But if you're not getting the answers that are working for you, you've got to go in. You've got to go in and figure out, why is it that, when the doctor maybe is suggesting some sort of change like you do in your practice with food, like, that you're not being consistent with it, and who can help, maybe figure that out if you don't know how to do that. But people can do it on their own. There's so many resources. There's so many things that are free now with the world of YouTube.
Yeah, information out there.
People can begin to do that. Now, sometimes it's hard. That's also challenging because there's conflicting information that's out there, and that can be really overwhelming to navigate. So what I say to people is, again, just stick to the basics, right? Just stick to the basics. Sleep, food, nature, relationship to technology, and any ways that you can just deepen your relationship to yourself, whether it's through journaling, whether it's through meditation or movement-based meditation or somatics or things like that, that can help. When you come at your health from that perspective, it will only improve.
Yeah. Sometimes people want their problem to be worse than the simple things. Have you noticed that too?
Of course.
It's like, we could make these simple changes, and they're like, well, it's so much bigger than that. Like, food isn't going to make a difference. Not looking at my phone isn't going to make a difference. If you do it consistently, it is going to make a difference. We don't always need to have some mold toxicity or really rare thing. Like, that's the problem. And sometimes it is, but a lot of times it's not. And people want there to be some big diagnosis or some big major thing so that the simple stuff isn't the answer, but it often is, or at least it will always make a difference, even if that isn't the end all be all for whatever the person's condition is.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I see it all the time in my practice where people want to spend thousands and thousands of dollars on functional lab testing. And I'm like, hold up, you're wasting your money. You don't even have the basics in place. Let's see if that helps before you go drop $3,000 on, a GI map and a food sensitivity test and a Dutch test. And those things are great. I mean, I've done those things on myself. Yep. They give you so much information, but they're so expensive. And so why waste your time and money? Like, if you're not sleeping, if your stress is through the roof, if you're definitely eating in a way where your blood sugar is not regulated and your metabolic health isn't on point, well, wouldn't it make sense to start there before you just go invest? But again, some people, I'll say, great, go get the test, because then they see the numbers and they're like, okay, now I'll make the change because I know for sure. And I'm like, your body already told you because you feel like garbage all the time. You know what I mean? But yes. And I think that whole kind of victimhood mentality really stems from, again, these beliefs, these adaptations that we develop as young humans of, somebody needs to come save me, or that people don't love themselves enough sometimes to want to make the changes. I see that too, where people have so much self-hatred and so much disconnection from themselves that they don't value themselves enough to take the extra time, effort, and energy to make these changes. Because let's be real, to live a lifestyle that is truly healthy and wholesome, it's a full-time job. Yeah. It takes a lot of time, effort, and energy. I would argue over and over again that it's worth it, but to make that a priority, you got to love yourself. If you don't love yourself or value yourself, how do you motivate yourself to make those choices?
Yeah, that's so true.
Right. Yeah. In a world that's designed to not have us be successful with that, right? Sometimes when I spiral out into my moments of feeling overwhelmed, I'll say like, I feel like I'm swimming upstream because everything I'm doing is against the narrative in the culture that I live in.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's like an extra effort to do everything. And so I can get into this victimhood mentality where I'm like, woe is me. And I can tell this story to myself about how hard it is. Or I can reverse it and say, well, what a privilege to be able to do this. What a gift to have this knowledge and awareness and ability financially to be able to live this way and to have a partner that's supportive and to have these pieces in place that make it possible for me to do this. Yeah, it's hard, but I get to feel good and have a lot of health and happiness because of it. That automatically changes the way I think. Just by shifting the thought, I change the emotion. And when my emotions are changed, then the outcome and the behavior, however I act, is going to change. So it's like the cognitive triangle, right? If you want to change your behavior, you've got to start with your thoughts. So mindset shift sounds basic, not so sexy, not so glamorous, but it works, right? So it really is. Yeah, It's not the sexy, glamorous things that make us better. It truly is the basics. And I'll say it over and over again. It just starts with this connection to self. And from there, it just flows. And that really is what has saved my life in so many ways. And it's what I witness as I hold space for other people and them really embarking on their own health journey and beginning to feel a whole heck of a lot better than they did when they, began the process. It starts with us and that relationship to ourselves. So if you don't get anything else from the conversation of all the nuances and things that have been touched upon, hear that if you can sit down and shut up a couple times a week and start to build that relationship to yourself, the rest comes. It really.
This has been great. I could talk to you all day. I feel like there's just so many things that so many rabbit holes we could go down, but this was excellent. So what's next for you? And then where can people find you?
Yeah. So my website, www.holisticrootscoaching.com, is the best way to reach me and see what I'm up to. I run retreats. So I have a holotropic breathwork retreat in New Hampshire in May, and then a Wild Woman Within retreat in September. That is in northern Maine. And so those are two kind of bigger events that I'm doing. And then I run all sorts of smaller events. If you're local to the southern New Hampshire area, you can look on my website, whether it's teaching homestead-based skills with you, or I teach sourdough bread and kombucha making, and I run all sorts of kind of pop-up programs in my neighborhood related to the practice of yoga and mental health, as well as my coaching program. And then I also have online self-paced programs on my website. So there's lots of ways to access me. And it would just be an honor to be invited into anyone's space. I'm here to help, and also happy to be a resource. I always say to people, like, if I'm not the right person for you, I always will try to help people with other recommendations that I may know of to steer people in the right direction. So don't ever hesitate to reach out. I'm definitely happy to help.
Great. Awesome. Well, thank you so much. This was a great conversation. We'll have to have you back on.
I would love to. It was great.
All right. Thanks, Sarah.
If you enjoyed this conversation, please take a moment to leave a review. In that review, I would love to hear what topics you'd like to see covered next and which guests you'd love to hear from in future episodes. You can connect with me on Instagram at Original Being Podcast, and be sure to follow, like, and share the podcast on all platforms to help spread the word. Thanks for listening.